This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good evening everyone. So today was Gimel Eir. Gimel Eir is the Yahrtzeit of Rabbi Yeshayele Kerestir. His name was Rabbi Steiner. So I want to thank Yossi Badner, who was ma'ir me to bring to my attention the Indian of today. And I'll tell you the truth, I'm not an expert in the life of Rabbi Yeshayele Kerestir, but one thing you can't help but observe that when I was a kid, I don't think anybody ever heard of him. And now, there's a major pilgrimage to, I think they said that today there were 20,000 Jews who went there. So you have to, you can't help but notice, what is this big attraction to his kever? So I went to the store today. They have different biographies. They have the English, they have the Hebrew. Wasn't sure which one to get. And I realized, if the English is a translation of Hebrew, the juicy stuff's going to be in the real one. Okay, anyway, I'll tell you a few things. This is not a biographical share. I want to just share with you one thought about why all of a sudden everyone's attracted to this particular kever. So the first thing I wanted to know, I called a few people. Could you tell me Divrei Torah from Rabbi Yeshayele Kerestir? And, I don't have any particular ones to share with you. In fact, he was master his knowledge of Torah. He hid very much his knowledge of Torah. But it brings over here that after he finished, he was known primarily for his chesed. His chesed was considered astounding. First of all, his hallmark, he made a Malav Malka every Matzai Shabbos, and all the preparations were done Matzai Shabbos. There was no leftovers at the Malav Malka. He had chickens shechted, and if there weren't enough chickens, they would shecht behemoths. His wife went all out, and they had, hundreds of people at these sudos. And besides that, his house was open like the house of Avraham Avinu. That's what he was known for. That's what his specialty was. That's what he was mefursam in, the midah of chesed. In Torah, he was not mefursam in Torah, but certainly he was a tremendous Talmid Chacham. He brings over here that he did not sleep at night. It says over here, the way he would stay up all night, there was a certain ger. To find the story, there was a ger from the city of Kerestir. I don't know, that's an interesting phenomenon in and of itself, who was appointed to fill up a basin of cold water, and Rabbi Shayla would put his feet in it and stay up, and then when the water turned lukewarm, this ger had to change the water and put in, so he would stay up all night. It brings over here that he did not sleep more than 2 hours a night. Okay. Be it as it may, some people would try to sneak into his room at night. He had an Aron of Svarim, which was dedicated to his Svarim. And then when he finished all of his chasadim for the day, he would bring into his room, it says over here, primarily Shas and Shulchan Aruch. But nobody knew exactly, what he was learning. He was master that from people. But it says over here that some people try to sneak into the room and listen. And whenever they would listen into the room, mysteriously, there were always two voices. Him and the Shechina, somehow. There were always two voices emanating from the room. Anyway, in his shul, he hired a Maggid Shir. So he would teach Mishnayos B'mincha l'marav, and Rabbi Yeshayele would sit off to the side. And if you're not giving Shir, so sometimes it would look like he was dozing off. So one time, the Maggid Shir had a certain question in Masechta Klayim. So Rabbi Yeshayele realized, what's going on? What's the difficulty? And immediately he was able to answer right away in a very difficult Mishnah in Masechta Klayim. Okay, there are different stories that are brought down that Hitaka was a tremendous yadon in Kol Torah Kula. Be it as it may, that is not what he was known for. He was known for his incredible midas hachesed. I'll read to you first what it says on his kever. So it says over here in this holy book, he has a copy of his kever. Where did it go? Now this is your story. 1 second. What? No, so they have a good edition over here. Sorry, one second. What? Oh, it's in the back. Sorry. Yeah, this is a picture of some nussel. It says like this. Yachid b'doyer b'tzidkas pizroina v'yashris darchet tzidkasai. He was one in the generation in his righteousness and his manner of tzedakah. He preserved kindness. There's no way to measure his sanctity and his chasidus. He was well known in his kindness and his as a beneficiary to so many people, and his humility. He was a tremendous master of tefillah, and many were saved through his tefillah. He clothed the naked. He married off Yisoimim. His house was open, like the house of Avraham Avinu. And even so, even though he fed so many thousands of people, his own household members were aniyim. Tens of thousands of people flocked to him from all over the world, and he never got angry in his life. He served the Amunah, his Rebbe. His Rebbe was Rabbi Akash Miliska. Many tzaddikim, many gedolim would come to visit him. He was mezakeh the rabbim with Amunah B'Tachon that he implanted in them. Even all the tzaddikim of the Dar proclaim that he, in fact, is a kadosh. And it says, interesting, of all the things that he did, it says, Lechem Rav Avad Lesudas David Hamelch Hashem Harbe Zevach Nesachem. He had very extravagant Malav Malkas, and his Kedusha was Behatznei Aleches, and he covered himself over, even in his davening. You know, people would come to observe his davening, and they expected to see somebody davening, shaking, moving the whole... It was very calm, where people were taken aback. This is... And in fact, the story goes, this story I saw, his wife served the guest cholent, and the cholent didn't look hot. And then when it was very... And when he burned it, Rabbi Shah says, cholent is like tefillah. You can't tell how hot it is. When you get close, you see how hot it is. Any event, so what's the pshat? All of a sudden, in the end of days, right before Mashiach comes, everybody's coming to the kever of this tzaddik who was not known for his godless in Torah. He was known more for his godless in chesed. The interesting thing, I once saw a comment of the Kotzker. It's brought in the Sefer Lavois Kodesh. That in the end of days, before Mashiach comes, there'll be very few people who learn Torah properly. Very few people who daven properly. There'll be a lot of balei tzedakah. So it could be as part of, and the Kotzker says, in fact, the Gula will come in the chus of tzedakah. Like it says, Tzion b'mishpat tipadeh b'shavah b'tzedakah. So in the end of days, when Klal Yisrael needs more than anything, there's chus of tzedakah. After all, that's what the Kotzker says. The observation is the other two amudim will be very weak. So maybe that is why somehow, if we don't understand, but the mazel of Klal Yisrael is to flock to this zechus, the zechus of tzedakah v'chesed, which will be the most prominent zechus at the end of days. But then I saw a gra, a very interesting gra, phenomenal gra. By the way, Rav Elimelech of Lezhensk says, Fasemes quotes it, that until the Arizal, the world stood on Torah. And from the Arizal and on, the world stands on Chesed. Well, Lamaisa, that's not Niskabel in Olam HaYeshivas. The Olam HaYeshivas, it's the Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, from the time the Torah was given on Har Sinai until the end of time. There's an incredible Gra. And the Gra also may give us insight into this phenomenon, this flocking to, Rabbi Yeshayele was known as the Gadol in Tzedakah v'Chesed. So I forgot, Ashi, you said his wife's family was helped with the build up the Makom over there.
They're
from Kerestir. You can see him after the share. Oh. Yeah. So there's an Avos Rav Nas. Let me tell you the Avos Rav Nas and tell you the Gra. So it says like this. We know one of the three pillars of the world is Gemilas Chasadim. It says in Hosea, Ki Chesed Chafatzti V'lo Zevach. The world was created for chesed. Ki amarti olam chesed yibana. Then the Rabbi Nassim says a story. One time Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was leaving Yerushalayim and Rabbi Shua was following after him, and they see the base of and say, Oy vay! The Makom where the Avonos of Klal Yisrael are Neskaper, it's gone! What are we going to do? So Yochanan ben Zakkai said, don't sweat it. We still have another kapara. What is it? Gemilos chasadim, like it says, Ki chesed chafatzti v'lo zavach. We find Daniel was oisek in Gemilos chased. So I was always bothered on this other Rabbi Nassim like this. If you look at Rabbeinu Yonah says that if a person wants kapara, they should do two mitzvahs. Torah and chesed. Like it says, B'chesed ve'emes yichupar avayin. With chesed and Torah, you'll be atoned. So why, when they pass by the Machon Maggid Harakiah, does Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai say, don't worry, we still have chesed? He should have said, don't worry, I know we don't have avodah, we had chesed and Torah. What about Torah? Why did Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai only said, don't worry, we still have chesed? No, but chesed ve'emes yichupar avayin. Says the Heilige Gemara in Shir Shiurim Perek Vav Pasuk Daled, but after the base of MMH was destroyed, says the Gemara, we don't have avodah. Of course we don't have avodah. And we don't have Torah either. How's that? The Navi says in Eicha, Mal kavis arab agoyim ein Torah. There's no Torah. Once we went into Galus, we have no more Torah. What do you mean we have no Torah? Look at the shelf. The shore looks like there's a lot of Torah. It says in Chagiga, there used to be 600 Sidarim of the Mishnah. Look at the Kahati. They only have Shisha Siddur Mishnah. What happened to other 596? 94. They're gone! The Torah was lost with the Churban Beit HaMikdash. So there's no Avodah, there's no Torah. The only Amud that we have left is what? Gemilas Chasadim. That's Pshat, says the Gemara of Rav Noisan. When the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed and they cried, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, don't sweat it, because we still have Chesed. What about Torah? We don't have Torah. But we learn Torah. What are we learning then? So I think the Pshat is like this. This is a different way of saying it, without saying like, there's a tradition of Melech Milazhensk that the world stands on Chesed from the time of the Arizal. Okay, if that's your tradition. And the Kotzker says in the end of days, there will be Bali Chesed, but not really Bali Torah, Bali Avodah. But I think there's another way to say it. This is the way the Gro would say it. Say it like this. Avada and Avada, we have Torah. And when we learn Torah, it's the biggest chus. In other words, what's the bigger mitzvah? Torah or Chesed? Avada, Torah is the bigger chus. Avada is bigger than Tzedakah. Avada, if a person's learning and they could do Chesed instead, of course you have to learn, unless it's the Yefshar De'achirim. The Shulchan Aruch never changed. And who's greater, a great Talmud Chacham or a great Baal Chesed? Of course, a great Talmud Chacham is greater. Chazon Ish writes, when Rabbi Kiva darshan the pasuk, Es Hashem Alekecha Tira LeRabbois, right? It says, fear God, and who else? So it says the Chazon Ish, Rabbi Kiva was trying to determine who else in this world is most similar to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Could have said about Midos, Yari Shamayim, about Chesed, about Tzedakah. He said, Es Hashem Lekach LeRabbois, Talmidei Chachamim. There's no question. Talmid Chacham is on a higher level than a Baal Chesed. Baal Chesed is great. But it's like this. It's like this. If you wanted to know, there are 3 Amudim that the world stands on. There's only one Amud upon which the world stands that has not been diminished with the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. And what is that? Chesed. Torah is mostly diminished. Now, Avada, when we have, whatever we have of Torah is real Torah. And if you learn it, it's the biggest chus than Chesed. But still, there, in one sense, Chesed is greater than Torah. Not overall, but in that it's the one Amud that never was downgraded with the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. With the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, Torah, most of it was downgraded. Most of Avodah is almost non-existent, except for Tefillah. Chesed is in its pure form. And therefore, maybe that's why in the Zechus of Chesed, the Geula will come, because it's the one Amud that stands as sturdy as the way it stood when the Beis HaMikdash stood. But be it as it may, here we are at the end of days, and we see this phenomenon of Klal Yisrael flocking to the kever of this tzaddik. That means Klal Yisrael is embracing the midah of tzedakah and the midah of chesed. And even if we were not Zeicha to go there, but certainly we should learn from his holy ways of devotion to other Yidden, especially Ba'achila, that, the Shla HaKadosh writes, the biggest mitzvah you could do, in a way, is Achnasas Orchem. Why? Bigger, he says, than lending money, bigger than clothing somebody. He says, because why do we do chesed? To emulate Hashem. The most pure way to emulate Hashem, the closest way to emulate Hashem is Achnasas Orchem. Why? Because what does Hashem do? He brings us into His home, that's this world. He gives us to eat, He gives us to drink. In other words, if you would sum up, what is the chesed of Hashem? It's Achnasas Orchem. So, right? Because Hashem brings us into His home and He gives us all of our needs. Wow. So when a person does Achnasas Orchem, which was Rav Yeshayele's hallmark characteristic, so we hope the zechus of this tzaddik is Megan for all of Klal Yisrael, and we should learn from his Drachav HaKadoshim. Shkayach.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.